Hello. My name is Dru Lavigne, and I'm here to talk about what's happening with BSD certification. And I must say that I'm very happy to be back here in Krakow. The very first talk on BSD certification was at Meet BSD 2005, and it doesn't seem possible that that was 5 years ago. A lot has happened since then, and I'd like to give an update on what has happened. I do have some references in the slides, and at the very end, the slides are already online, so I have the URL where you can go to get the slides. What we're going to discuss in this talk, I'm going to give a little bit of a background just on certification, and then I'm going to get into the BSD Certification Group, what our goals are with the certification, a little bit about the structure behind the group, and then I'm going to talk about the two exams. So the exam that's out now, the BSDA, and the exam that we're currently working on, the BSDP. I'll give you a bit of an idea of the work that's still ahead of us and how you can help with the effort. So if we talk a little bit about certification, anybody that is into IT industry certifications knows a little bit about them. So certifications started becoming popular in the mid-90s, and this is when the big vendors started offering certifications. So it started with Novell, and then Microsoft and Cisco got into the game. Certification is a great idea, but there are pitfalls in it. And whenever you start talking about certification, especially in any sort of open source group, you probably will start a flame war because people will talk about the merits and the mismerits of certification. And some of the bad stuff that's associated with certification will be brain dumps. Where do I go on the internet to see the questions so I can read them ahead of time and pass the exam? And then you also end up with some people, Microsoft was very popular, where some people did not know what they were doing, but they had the MCSE designation. So that's one of the things that can happen in a certification. And that really devalues the value of the certification if you're the person that is spending the time studying, saving up to take the exam, hoping usually that will promote your career. If we look at it from the organization that's actually creating and maintaining the exams, certifications are very expensive to launch. And this is the reason why mostly it's very large companies that will offer certifications. When we started the project, we were told that we would not be able to launch a certification for under $2 million US. Well, I can tell you it doesn't cost that much money, but it does cost a fair bit of money. And companies who are doing certifications, they are already established and they already have alternate revenue streams because there's a lot of money up front to get the certification out the door before you actually start making any money. And in the industry, they say it's going to take about 2 years before you start making your money back. So the obvious question becomes, why is it so expensive? Because really, how hard is it to create an exam? Can't you just get a bunch of people over the weekend, maybe over some beer, writing some questions, throw them up online and call it good? Well, you could do that, and there's probably people out there that have, but what value would it be in that certification? What good would that program be? So if you're really going to go out there and start doing it right, you're going to have to spend some money. And companies where they spend their money, first of all in SMEs, which stands for subject matter experts. These are the people that in theory know what they're doing and know how to write questions on the exam. The other thing that you can spend a lot of money on, and having spent money on it myself, I know the value in it, it's something called psychometrics. And we'll talk a little bit about psychometrics. And if you're interested in learning more about it, on our website, right on the main page, there is a paper called Why Psychometrics, which tells you why it is a valuable thing to spend some money on. And basically it makes sure that the exam is a fair assessment of whatever it is that you say that you're assessing. There are other places you can spend money. If you're trying to give value to employers and to the people taking the exam, getting accredited with an institution is a good thing, but accreditation is one of those things that costs money, both for the actual fee to get the accreditation, but more than that, in the time it takes to get your thing up to standards so it'll actually pass the accreditation. If you're going to offer an exam, obviously you're going to want some sort of curriculum and training materials, and it costs money to get people to write these things, especially people who know what they're doing and understand how to develop curriculum. They usually don't tend to do that for free. So there's all kinds of ways you can spend money creating that exam product. The other thing, which actually turns out to be more problematic, because if we're thinking open source, being open source people, we have our own subject matter experts. We may have to herd them and get them to write things, but we can do that for free. And we can often get people to help develop training materials. But in order, once you have an exam, you have to actually have a way to deliver it to the person who wants to take the exam. And there's ways to do that. You can use software delivery mechanisms, and I'll talk a little bit about the cost of that. Or you can offer a paper-based exam, but you're going to have to pay someone to show up and actually proctor that exam. And you have to obviously make that available. So there's still costs in delivering the exam once you have one. One of the questions that we get asked very often is, when will your exam be available online? And I have two answers for that. One, it won't just be in an online environment, because the exam has to be in a proctored environment. Otherwise, we don't know who's taking the exam and what access they have to other tools while they're taking the exam. Now, there are proctored environments out there that are online, so you've probably heard of either Pearson VUE or Prometric. The problem with a certification body is, if you want to use those services, they're very expensive to use. So just to actually have an exam available, you have to pay something called an annual fee, which starts at $75,000 US. They don't care how many exams you deliver as long as you pay your $75,000 US once a year. And that is per. So if you want to offer it through both VUE and Prometric, you're looking at $150,000 a year. That doesn't count the $4,000 they charge you for uploading the exam, and the $500 they charge you every time you want to change something on the exam. So it's very expensive. If you've ever written a lot of certifications and noticed that exams don't tend to change that much, it's the same questions, it's because it's very expensive to change the questions on an exam. Unfortunately, there is a monopoly on exam delivery. Basically, it is VUE or Prometric, because they went out and bought all the competition in the late 90s. And the other thing that's unfortunate, especially if you're thinking as an open source person, their software is proprietary, only runs on Windows systems, only runs in Internet Explorer, and we don't even have any idea if it's over SSL, because they don't tell you what their security stuff is. And there currently aren't any open source alternatives. The other thing that gets more interesting, if you want to start offering more advanced exams, VUE or Prometric will only allow you to do multiple choice questions with their software. If you want to offer any sort of lab-based environment, like Cisco does with their CCNA, you as the organization have to write that software. So Cisco paid about $50,000 to write their software, and it's Flash-based. The other alternative is to have your own testing lab, like Cisco does with their CCIE, or Red Hat does with their RHCE. And that tends to be very expensive as well. I mentioned at the beginning that most certifications out there are managed by large vendors, typically because they actually have the money and the resources to launch an exam. When we start looking at open source, if we actually want to have certifications that assess open source skills, what's available out there? Well, the very first exam that was out there was from CompTIA, which is an industry consortia, and they had the Linux Plus. That's no longer available. It's actually been rolled into LPI. LPI started in the very late 90s. And it started out as being community-based. They got their SMEs from the community. They worked with a psychometrician who worked with the community. And actually started out in Canada. And I know the people who started LPI. Unfortunately, none of the original people are still there. And it's now a California company that is running it like a commercial company. There are other certification bodies out there. So Zend offers a certification for PHP. Enterprise DB offers a certification for Postgres. Canonical has some Ubuntu exams. And Novell has added SUSE certification to its offerings. I know all the people at Zend, Enterprise DB, and Canonical, and they are just being swamped by their annual fees. So they're basically just not making money. There are other open source communities out there that would like to launch an exam, and we probably get queries, I would say, from 5 or 6 organizations a year asking, well, how do you start an exam? And there are huge barriers. So cost is one, the time and the work necessary, and knowing what the heck you're doing are huge barriers. So that's a little bit of the background. When we got together, we had no idea what we were doing. We slowly figured that out over time. And the BSD Certification Group basically started as a bunch of people saying, why isn't there a certification for BSD? Now that's a question that came up on the mailing list, usually about once a year. There'd be a flame war for a week, and then everything would die down, and nothing would happen. So after about 4 or 5 years of that, some of us got together and said, well, let's actually do something about it. One of our goals, the people who are involved in BSD certification have been around BSD for a long time. Most of them have been on the mailing list for 10, 15 years. So we think like BSD people. And given the opportunity to make a certification, we thought, well, how would we do it the way we would want to do it? And of course, community is one of our big things. So we want to involve people who will receive value from the certification and who will benefit from having a certification. So obviously working sysadmins can, or those who are looking for system administration employment, want a way to be able to assess their skills. The people who hire BSD administrators, it's nice to know that you have a certain level of skill set and an assessment behind it. So it gives you an idea in the hiring process, how much work and training am I going to have to put into this new administrator? And so the people who manage administrators like that as well. Those that are in the training field, it's nice to be able to have an offering that's not Linux. We can have some BSD stuff. And there are still universities out there that teach system administration, and it's nice to be able to offer an industry certification on top of the diploma program. And obviously, those who want to advocate the use of BSD and who are hearing all the time, well, we go with Linux because we know we can find Linux certified people. Well, it's nice to be able to say, well, there's BSD certified people out there. So these are the people that we want to be involved in the exam creation process. The other thing is that we tend to be very practical. So we don't want an exam where you go and memorize switches. We don't want an exam where you spit out book data that has nothing to do with what a working administrator has to do on a daily basis. So we're trying to assess real-world on-the-job skills. The other thing that we work into the exam is we're actually assessing experience. We don't want you going out there finding out exam questions and memorizing them. We want you to actually show that, yes, I know how to administer a BSD system. So one of the questions I'm often asked is, where are the sample test questions, or why don't you provide sample test questions? We don't want to do that. We want you to be familiar with the exam objectives, and if you know how to do the stuff in the exam objectives, you will find the exam very easy. We don't want you memorizing questions. The other thing that we realize is we would actually, if given a choice, prefer to have quality over quantity. We're very proud of our program, and when somebody says that they're BSD certified, we want that to actually mean something. So while it would be nice to go out there and to certify everybody in the world and to make all kinds of money, that's not what we're aiming for. We're looking for quality. Obviously, being involved in BSD for a long time, doing things the open source way is very important to us. All of our infrastructure runs on BSD systems. Except for some of the social media stuff, all of our applications are open source. If we ever use an online delivery solution, it will not be proprietary. And if we have to, we will go out there and make an open source solution, BSD license, so it's available for other organizations to use. All of our planning and work is transparent, so we have mailing lists, IRC, social media sites. Obviously, the creation of the exam questions has to be done under an NDA, but anything other than that, all of our plans and that are transparent. And anyone is welcome to, and we love for people to get involved. Simply because there's a lot of work to do, and the more people, the better. Some of our other goals is we want it to be available globally. So wherever you are as a BSD administrator, if you want to get certified, we want to be able to offer you the exam. Where practical, it would be nice to have the exam available in the local language. And we also want it to be globally affordable. Psychometrically valid is a big deal because it actually shows that there's some quality to the assessment. Anybody who's written a certification, you can tell if you're writing a psychometrically valid certification or not. So if you have to read through 3 screenfuls of wording before they actually ask you the question, that is not psychometrically valid. In a psychometrically valid exam, you get to the point about what you're asking the person to do, because you want to see if they know how to do that. Not try to figure out, well, what the heck are you asking me to do? You want the exam to be understandable, even for people where English is not their first language, which means the questions have to be written very clearly. The exam has to match the exam objectives. You don't want to write an exam that has questions on it that you never thought you'd see coming because they weren't in the exam objectives. Or you don't want to study for an exam that has 100 exam objectives and you only get tested on 6 of them. So the exam should match the objectives. And if you go through all the work of having the exam be that good, you want to make sure that the environment that's offering the exam is trusted and that it's proctored. Okay, so a little bit about the BSD Certification Group. We are a registered nonprofit. We were incorporated in the state of New Jersey in 2005. We do have a mission, and our mission is to assess the skills of BSD system administrators. We are community-based, but being incorporated, we do have a legal governance structure. So we have bylaws, we have to do income tax, that sort of stuff. And we're really big on open source and the value of volunteer contributions. A little bit of the internal structure. Because of the incorporation requirements, we have to have a board of directors, and there's currently 5 people on the board. Anybody is welcome to be a board of director, and we do have an election process for that. In addition to the board of directors, we have an internal group where we talk about boring process stuff. Anybody is allowed to be a member of that group, and if you're interested, basically you just ask. We go, great, somebody else to help with the work, and you're on board. We do have some advisory board members. So for example, Kirk McCusick is on our advisory board. Currently, we have 9 subject matter experts that are under NDA, and I'm sure that number will increase as we start writing the questions for the next exam. The only person who actually gets paid for any of the work that's done is our psychometrician. And if anybody is aware of any psychometrician that works out there for nothing, let me know. But up to this point, we have not found one. Very pleased with the psychometrician that we have. When we had no idea what we were doing, she was very helpful, and she does keep the exam on track for us. And we probably have a couple of dozen proctors throughout the world. For the wider community, we do have 2 mailing lists, probably about 700 people on it. One of the things we were surprised when we started the mailing lists is developers live on them, sysadmins do not. So the mailing lists actually tend to be quiet. For that reason, we started going into social media, because that seems to be where everybody's hanging out these days. We do have 2 LinkedIn groups, one for anybody interested in certification, and one that's only available to you once you're certified. We do have quite a few translators in 22 languages. Since day one, all of our hardware and bandwidth has been donated, as well as the system administration and web development, just to keep the infrastructure going. And we do have ongoing relationships with other certification bodies, and we try to form relationships with universities and colleges. We are separate from the BSD projects and the foundations. We let them do what they do, and we do what we do. We work very hard to keep the exam real, so we get a lot of feedback from employers and sysadmins. And one of the things that we are really interested in promoting is getting our exam objectives into existing diploma programs. I've actually been a trainer since the early 90s, and I like to think that I'm pretty good, but I can't teach you how to be a sysadmin in a week. Boot camps are nice if you already know what you're doing and you just want to catch up on some knowledge for an exam. But if you're going to teach someone system administration skills, that needs to be part of a larger program. Otherwise, you're just learning to pass an exam. Again, the psychometrically valid. The first 2 points I've already mentioned. The third one is actually very useful. So psychometrics doesn't stop once the exam is launched. It's always ongoing. So it's basically using statistical analysis on how people respond to the exam questions. And our psychometrician, who knows absolutely nothing about either BSD or system administrator, by looking at the stats can tell us things like, it looks like question number 32 is either not being understood or there's more than one correct answer, just by looking at how people are responding to it. So we can then go back to that question and say, if I look at the question from this point of view, I can see why there would be more than one answer. So we can go and review those questions and modify them. The other thing that's very useful about the ongoing metrics, especially as you start getting into more testing centers and have more proctors, it'll let us know, for example, if one particular area, the marks tend to be much higher than others, or that people are getting questions that are usually considered to be quite hard, they're all getting them right. So that gives us an idea, maybe some questions got leaked. We need to look at that proctor situation. Looking back at our goals, we like to think that the exam is globally affordable, so $75 USD, which is almost laughable in North America, it's so cheap. but it does make it available to other parts of the world. And the other thing that we try to encourage is local study groups. We would love to have user groups get together, spend a couple of months studying for the exam, and then write the exam all together. Because one of the things that's important about community, anybody who's a system administrator knows that it's all about networking. And I'm not talking about the wires and the wireless. It's who you know and who you can get information from when you're trying to solve a problem. So we would love to actually have the studying for the exam be as part of a larger community effort. As well as training materials. All of our training materials are BSD licensed, so they're available for anybody who wants to go out and make $1 million on them, to go out and sell those materials, and those that want to actually have them openly available. Okay, let's take a look at the exam that we have out right now, the BSD Administrator exam. If you take a look at the dates on that, it took us a while to get that first exam out the door. Part of that reason was because we had no idea what we were doing. We were sort of figuring it out as we went along. To give you the idea of the steps involved in order to have a good exam, the first thing you start with is something called a job task analysis. So basically, you want to get as much input as possible from employers and working admins about what is important to assess. So it's basically a survey where you have about 200 job tasks, and you ask people, if you're hiring an administrator, how important is it for them to know how to do this task, and how often do you expect them to do it? And we also leave it open for comments. So basically, you get all kinds of data back, and you spend a good 3 or 4 months sifting through it to see what's important and what should be on the exam. Once you've sifted through all that information, you publish the exam objectives or the exam requirements, so people need to know what it is they need to study. You'll notice there was a fairly large period between that and before the beta exam went out. And during that time, we were writing exam questions and working with a psychometrician, actually building the exam. We took the comments that we received from the beta period, and the last thing before actually launching the exam is something that's called an Enghoff session. And you take the results from your beta, all of your statistical analysis, and you sit down with working administrators and you ask them, looking at this question, how do you think someone would respond to that? So if I'm assessing somebody with skills of 6 months, would I expect them to get that question right or not? You do that with a group of about a dozen. You look at all their feedback. And at the end of it, the psychometrician knows what the passing score is. So that's when you actually figure out what score you need to get on the exam. And then you launch the exam, and it's been out since February of 2008. The target audience for the exam is at least 6 months of experience. There's 7 knowledge domains they need to know, and it's scored 400 questions. The passing score looks a bit weird. It deals with the metrics in the analysis. Basically, you need to get about 63% to pass the exam. How we offer the exam is paper-based, and we offer it at exam events. So typically, most of the open source conferences, we have the exam available. We've also worked with user groups, employers. We have had 1 military department and a couple of universities. So basically, any place where you can get a room available and at least 4 people wanting to take the exam, we'll happily make sure the exam's available. We're also trying to build a network of trusted testing centers that offer the exam on a regular basis. And currently, FreeBSD Brazil is doing that. And I think they've been doing that for about a year now. So they're doing most of South America. Just a couple of statistics on who's taken the exam. Before you can take the exam, you have to register for an ID. Looking this morning, it was about 1,730 people have an ID, and they're all over the world. They represent 107 countries. 195 have taken the exam so far, and 124 have passed, but there's still a couple that haven't been scored yet. And the average score in the exam is 67%. So that's the BSDA. The exam we're working on now is called the BSD Professional, and we're going through the same process. So we launched the JTA last fall, and we went through all of the results from that and published the report in March. And again, if you download the slides, the URL is there, and it's on the website as well. We're currently working on the exam requirements, so we're looking at all the stuff from the JTA. And this is an open process. Anybody is allowed to go on the wiki and see where we're at in the exam requirements. And if you have the time and want to help out, you can also help us write the exam requirements. And we have instructions on how to best help out on the wiki site. We do need reviewers for the exam requirements, so even if you don't have time to help write, we would love people to go through it and make sure we haven't missed anything. Because basically, once you publish the requirements, you don't want to change them unless system administration tasks change. And once the exam requirements are out, we are going to need people to help us write the actual exam questions. We're working pretty hard on finishing up the exam requirements. Our ETA is late July, may end up being early August. We'll see how it goes. Once the exam requirements are out, we're going to have to start sitting down writing the questions. And we hope to be able to do that, have the beta period and the ANGOF, so we know what the passing score is, in about 6 months. So we're looking at the end of this year, early next year. The really interesting part for this exam is it was very clear from the job task analysis that just a paper-based exam wasn't going to cut it. They also want to see some actual skills in a lab. So the interesting part will be how will we make that virtual lab, and how do we make sure it's actually available throughout the world. So we're going to have the two components. Jim Brown, who's one of the members of the BSDCG, has been with us since day one, did a talk at BSD Can. So if you're interested in all the considerations for that lab-based environment, that's what his talk was about. And his slides are available on our website. The BSDP, the professional exam, is for somebody with more experience. We're looking at a minimum of 3 to 5 years. There's quite a few study domains. There's 11 instead of 7. And again, links for the report and the objectives are due out. If we look at the works that we have in progress, right now we're doing a push on getting the BSDP out the door. So we have to finish those objectives, write the questions, offer the beta, set the passing score, and then offer the exam. Other things that we have on the we're always doing and we try to concentrate on is we do want to improve the availability of both exams. And one way to do that is to build a network of trusted testing centers. So either working with user groups or universities about keeping the exam available. And the other thing that will always be in the back of our mind until it's a reality is to have that open source online delivery solution. We already have the requirements for the solution. Basically, we need a project manager, because the last time we set up the repository and the mailing lists and the IRC channels, and it devolved into a discussion of what language will we use. So basically, we need somebody to herd the cats and to get it out the door. If you're interested in that, please let me know. Study materials. Probably the #1 question we get is, where are the study materials? We've had the exam objectives for the BSDA out for 4 years now, put them under a BSD license and hope people would make materials out of it. That hasn't really happened yet. So we need people to help us with writing the materials. We do have a wiki available, and we did get some user-generated content, but it's not enough to actually be considered a curriculum. We need more people to translate the exam objectives, and when the exam objectives come out for the BSDP, we'd like to have them available in as many languages as possible. We don't have any labs at all, so for people that need to practice the objectives, exercises for them to go through. And it'd be really nice to have a network of study groups where people wanting to study for the exam could meet with people either online or in person. The other thing that we're working on towards this year is the ISO accreditation for certification bodies. It is a requirement for many governments throughout the world in order for their employees to take an exam, as well as several of the military institutions. Besides giving clout to the exam, showing that it's a really good exam, it also gives clout to the organization and the processes behind it. So you know it's not some fly-by-night organization that's going to disappear, and it has all of the processes and policies required to keep a certification process valid. We have had requests for other exams, which we'll consider once we get over launching the BSDP. One that I would really like to see get out the door is a packet filter exam. We do have the best firewall out there in the industry, and it would be nice to be able to certify people on those skills. The current exams only are command line in dealing with internet servers. So we've had a lot of requests to do desktop administration. How do you keep your users happy, keep printing going, that sort of thing. We've had a lot of vendors approach us about an embedded BSD exam, and there's been interest in global enterprise. So how do you scale to very large networks? There's lots of ways that you can help. So on my laundry list of what I need right now by the end of this month is we need people to help us with those exam requirements. That would be very useful. The other thing that would be useful is helping us to spread the word. I've been giving talks about certification for 5 years now, and I still come across people who had no idea there's a certification out there for BSD. And it would be nice for everybody to just know about it. We do have a lot of good publications on our site. We have a BSD survey we did the other year that tells you how people use BSD. Another way you can help us is to take the exam. It is nice to be able to give numbers to people to say, yes, this is a very viable exam. So many people have taken it. And of course, we can always use money. Just to give you an idea on money, just in case you think we're making lots of money, I don't have the 2009 report in yet, but if you take a look at the 2008, we don't bring in a lot of money, but we also don't spend a lot of money. We're very careful with our resources. You'll notice the biggest cut of our spending is for the psychometrician, but shipping is also a very large expense. The supplies and fees were big for that year because we had to buy certificates and seals and pencils and envelopes, that sort of stuff. But you'll notice that we haven't really asked people for donations, which is probably why we made $25 that year. So feel free to do a donation.
Who was it?
I don't know, I would have to look. I have to look it up. But feel free to beat that amount. Other ways you can help, we're always looking for people who can find an exam room and get people together to take the exam. We're always looking for people to help us with the questions. I would love to see that open source exam delivery solution come to reality one of these years. We need training materials. And if you work in any sort of training institution, we would love to see our exam objectives incorporated into your program. A whole bunch of resources, so the registration site, the Facebook group, the LinkedIn group. There is a video that goes into more detail about certification. There's my contact info and the URL to the slides. And it's blinking that I have 4 minutes for questions. Yes? Okay.
Anyone else needs a microphone? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Drew. I've actually got 2 questions. One of them is, well, let's be honest, BSD community is not the largest one in the world, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Did you do any study or research and can tell us what is actually the demand on the market for that kind of certification
Mm-hmm.
as compared to, if I may say so, our competitors, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Red Hat certification or Cisco. And the second question is, what do you see in general goal for BSD certification as compared to a fact that, for instance, Cisco certification is not only a Cisco certification, but it also means that the guy who's got the certificate is in general trained in networking, right? It's a networking professional. And for instance, a Red Hat certification is deemed to be an equivalent to Linux sysadmin. So it's not only a Red Hat certification as such to understand how Red Hat works, but it's also about how Linux is constructed and how the open source software is dealt with on that kind of operating system. So what would be a BSD in the future deemed as?
Okay. For the first question, pretty well any organization that is launching an exam basically has to create a demand for that exam. And this is something that had to happen in the 90s when Novell started their programs, Microsoft and Cisco. So you have to actually go out there and create your demand. You have to let people know what product is available and give them reasons why that would be valuable to them. Before we launched the exam, we had quite a bit of feedback from employers saying, I would send my employees to get that exam if there is an exam available. And we have had employers contact us since then saying the reason why we hired this person was because they had a BSDA. So we've had at least 3 employers say that about our BSDAs. But it's one of those things that takes time, and it's one of those things where the community can also help in spreading the word. So one, if people aren't aware that it's available, they're not going to see any value. They'll say, well, I've never heard of that before. So getting the word out there is very important. And then having people, once they have an exam, I would love to see people blog about, I'm a BSDA. We found that the LinkedIn groups are very helpful, and it's also very helpful on the person who's using the LinkedIn account, because typically you're saying to employers, this is something that I have and something that I'm proud of, and something I think that is valuable to an employer. And it's also something when employers contact us and say, where do I find somebody who's BSD certified? We can say, well, here's the LinkedIn group. There's 200 people right there, or whatever the number is for that. So it's one of those things that demand has to grow over time. And hopefully that touched a bit on both your questions. Okay.
Any questions?
Yeah, Julia?
Yeah. So what I've seen from this, the certifications you currently have and the ones that are planned for the future, everything seems to go in administration, right?
Yes.
Is it there any plan, or would it make sense to have a certification in development? Sorry? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Would it make sense to have a certification for development, such as people that knows how the system works internally and can do changes to it based on any requirements?
Yes. And we were surprised when we launched the exam at how many people said, when will you have a developer exam? Because one of the reasons why we started a sysadmin exam is if you are a system administrator, how do you go out there and prove your skills? If you're a developer, you can earn a commit bit, and you can show what parts of the code you work on, and then basically that's your resume. That's something you can show employers. But people are always interested in development. If we were to do that, the first step we may start at would be the embedded, because we've had a lot of vendors come to us and say we would love to see an embedded exam. And if we do start doing that, we're definitely going to have to get a lot of interest from developers, because we're going to need those SMEs. I'm a sysadmin, I know nothing about coding, so I wouldn't be much help in writing an exam on that. Okay? I think I'm done my time, so thank you.
Thank you very much.